What we're going to do today is paint an orange with a stem and a single leaf. Now, don't run away. That might sound like it's going to not be exciting, but there's a lot of things going on in painting this orange. First of all, we're going to be painting an object that is round like a ball. So in order to do that, we've got to play with different values. There's light hitting the orange from one side, so that side we've got to work on highlights. But then around on the other side, where the light is not hitting the orange, we've got to work on some darker values and some shape and brush techniques to get that orange to look round and to give the skin that little bit of a bumpy texture that it has. Then we're going to work on the stem and the leaf. Now the leaf on this orange is very easy to paint. There's no texture, it's very smooth, but it's going to help us to determine how we can preserve the mid-rib vein that goes right down through the middle of the leaf and paint around it. And we're going to be using some value in that leaf too, because there's a little bit of light shining on that leaf, so some spots are lighter than others. So I would say value is probably the number one thing that we're going to be working on with this orange. So stick around, come along for the ride, and let's go paint an orange.
To begin this painting, I'm going to start off with just putting on a wash of clear, clean water. This is my base wash for putting down my first color, which is going to be yellow, and I'm going to allow this water to sit on the paper just for a minute or so, let it sink in so when I put my first wash on, it doesn't just take off on me. Now I've got my Indian yellow here, and I'm going to test these colors and see if the consistency that I have is where I want it to be. I'm using my quinacridone sienna next and checking the consistency of it as well. I don't want the colors to have too much pigment in it or too little. I'm painting wet into wet, so it needs to be the right consistency for the beginning washes. As you can see here, I'm starting out with the Indian yellow and I'm placing that color all over the whole base of the orange. I allowed the water to sink in a little bit, so it still allows the paint to move around on the surface of the paper, but it also allows it to sink into the paper and hold on tight for the next washes to come. Now I've wet my paper again, and this time I don't have to sit and let it sink in because we've already put one wash on there and there's paint, so the water is going to move into the fibers of the paper much more quickly this time. I'm adding some of my quinacridone sienna because the center of this orange is where the majority of the dark values are. So I'm starting to map in those colors and where they need to go while I'm still trying to keep that Indian yellow and let it shine through these colors. I've added a little bit of my quin red at the bottom because it is very vibrant at the bottom of this orange. One more time, I'm adding more color, but this time I'm going wet onto dry paper. This will help me to intensify the color as I need to and keep the color and paint where I want it to be. Whereas when you paint wet into wet, the consistency of the paint and the temperament of the paint, it's going to move along the paper further out than when you paint wet on dry. Now that that layer is dry, or semi-dry I should say, I have a small brush and I'm putting a little bit of water on there and I am purposefully creating blooms. This is something you don't always want in a painting, but for this I do because I want to create the texture of the skin of this orange. So I'm taking a little bit of moisture off my brush and dropping it onto the surface of my damp paint. A close-up view will show you that it's starting to create these little blooms or blossoms. Some people call them cauliflower. I think they kind of look like little freckles, but what they're helping me do is make the skin of this orange have highlights, lowlights, and look bumpy, which in the end of things, that's what I'm trying to create in the texture of the skin. Now I've decided to take my Rosemary & Co. Eradicator brush. Around where I have the masking fluid, I decided that I needed to do a little bit of lifting in some of these areas because when I take that masking fluid off the paper is going to be white, shining through. So I figured that these areas need to be a little more subtle and not so harsh in color between where the masking fluid was and where the paint ends next to it. So I'm just softening those areas out and creating a little more shape and form by adding these highlighted areas. Now that the masking fluid is off, I have my big old mop brush again, and I have a very thin, watery mixture of my Indian yellow. This is going to kind of help blend everything together and make it look softer and smoother. It's going to tone down the white of the paper where that masking fluid was and give it an overall more polished look while allowing those masking fluid areas to still be seen, but look more realistic and not like sparkles, but like actual little reflections off the skin of the orange. We're going to start the stem here. I have a light wash of sort of a yellowy green, and I'm painting that all the way down the stem and onto the little stems that go into the leaves themselves, which I suppose would be considered part of the midrib. Once that layer dried, I've come back in with a little bit darker mixture of green because on the underneath side of that stem there is some shadowing, and this helps to create the more round feel of the stem as it goes down to the orange and connects. So I'm lifting a little bit of color out from the top side of the stem just to help accentuate that it's being hit by light right there. Now that layer is dry, so I'm coming back once more with that same thicker green mixture, and I've got some blue and some green mixed together here. This is just to help intensify that shadowed look on the back side, and as it comes around down the stem, it's going to go under the stem that goes to the leaves a little bit, and then sort of down the center of the stem that attaches to the orange. Now we get to start on the leaf. I've decided to paint this leaf in two sections, the front section or the bottom section here, and this is going to have a little bit of reflection of an orangey pink color, which is probably coming from the orange itself. So I'm going to begin by putting the sienna color in there first, and then I'm going to take a light wash of some of the green and just paint down the leaf, but sort of avoiding that orange or sienna color area. This is what you'll see me doing throughout the process of painting this leaf. I want to have that reflectiveness still showing, but I do want it to be subtle because in the reference photo you'll see that the color is a subtle reflection, like I said, probably from the orange skin itself. Now I've looked back at the stem and I see a couple of places where there's actually somewhat of a blemish on that stem. Now I'm painting mine in a 6x6 size. That's really too small to paint a lot of fine details. So what I'm doing instead is I just took some of the quinacridone red and added it into my green wet paint on this stem just to create that darkness that will reflect the fact that there's a little blemish. And now I've moved on to that second leaf. I'm painting the underneath side, or what would be considered the top of the leaf. This leaf is kind of turned over and you can see that the back curls over the front. And I'm painting what would be considered the front or the top of the leaf now. And because the leaf curls over, there is a bit of a shadow under here. So by varying the values of my green, I'm going to show that this leaf is curved over and there's a shadow underneath this area. In this back part where the stem and the leaf connect to each other, there was some brown. So I mixed together some of my green and red together, and that created a nice chocolatey brown. And I've put that on that area of the leaf where I saw it and added a little bit of the Indian yellow to kind of blend the brown into the green of the leaf. And then here I've gone back with another wash, and I'm building this leaf up layer after layer after layer. That's the way that I love to paint. I feel like I have more control over the values, the density of color that I'm using, and if I should make a mistake somewhere, I haven't gone too dark too quickly to prevent myself from erasing something that might need to be erased. I'm adding darker values in the areas of the leaf where I see that it's needed, but still allowing that reflection, that orangey pink reflection to show. And one last time, I'm coming back. I guess this is probably the fourth or fifth time that I've started adding some darker green to this leaf. But I think you'll find that painting in this method does truly allow you to be in control of what you're painting. So I'm darkening it down toward the tip and next to the midrib and painting around that pinky orange reflection. Now I don't want those to be too bright, so I am going to blend a little bit of green over the top of that just so it's still there, but it's very subtle. Now we get to move on to the other side of the leaf. What you'll see me doing here is painting within about a 1/16 of an inch of the first side of the leaf that I painted, and I'm going in with a relatively light wash. I will use this same color after the leaf is dry to paint the midrib in. I'm starting to add a little more color right here just to start building up the saturation and the darkness of value in this leaf. This one is pretty simple. There's not a lot going on, not a lot of highlights or super dark shadowing or anything, so this is an easy side to paint. And lastly, the leaf is done, and I'm using that first wash that I had on the leaf. It's kind of a yellowy green, and I'm just painting right down through where that midrib goes so that it's there and you can see it, but it's not too bright and it's not too dark. So this delicious orange is done.